I'm delighted this afternoon to be joined by one of our clients, Sally Sorbron, who looks after employee success at Salesforce, one of our large best organisations in the UK. Also, my colleague Charles Fair and Turo Bollier. And in case you didn't know, Great Place to Work is a global consultancy that focuses on helping organisations thrive through delivering on their people experience and providing the best experience for employees and also the best conditions for a productive and positive organisation. And we also focus critically also on recognising the best organisations. And as you can see, we've come up with the term more than just letters and lycra. And to start us off this afternoon, what I'd like to do is welcome Charles Fair to get us started and have an icebreaker. Thank you.
So, good afternoon. I know that lunch is coming up, and very important for Wellbeing. It certainly is for me anyway. So, we want to try and use our time efficiently. So, just by way of warming up, I wanted to talk about a research study that was done by the London School of Economics about what makes people happy or unhappy. And they did a huge study of 65,000 people and collected 4 million points of data by using mobile apps to get a sense of, for people to self-report how happy they were doing various activities. And they asked about what people were doing, so the activity, who they were with, and where they were. And in terms of the activities, these were the 40 different things they listed out. Now, by way of warming up, I'd like you to take a couple of minutes to think about this and say, which of those do you think were at the top of the list in terms of making people most happy, and which were at the bottom of the list for making people most unhappy? Out of those 40 activities, 65,000 people, that's a pretty big sample of people in the UK. Being sick in bed, so the gentleman at the right, spot on, and that actually lowers happiness levels by at least 20%. And this is sick in bed as in you're at home probably, it's not sort of sick in hospital, which might be different. But pretty damning thing, I think working is the second most unhappy activity across the UK. A few other things there, waiting and queuing and admin and so on. Caring and helping adults comes there. What about the other end? Bottom one perhaps may not be surprised, the physical contact's important, but there's quite a few things about getting out, you know, things about personal interest, about theatre, going to exhibitions and things like that, sports. Exercise is important. So the happiest things. The bottom one there puts happiness levels up about 15%. So it's quite a big spread between top and bottom. Yeah, it could be. In case you're interested, that's the list. But there's quite a lot of interesting stuff there. A lot of the stuff on the left actually is more, I think I'd say, routine stuff that you do. I mean, it's just texting and housework and things like that. One that comes up really important is socialising. And there is interaction between these things. And what's happened, the data found that actually working and studying, the effects of that can be ameliorated by socialising at work. That contact with people, that being able to have friends at work, and organisations, best workplace, are often very good at enabling that to happen. The social element at work is important. It doesn't work for everybody. Some people, you know, do prefer to work alone. But that's very important. The other thing the research found actually was that who you're with at work makes a big difference. So people are happier when they're with their peers and their colleagues, but actually they prefer to be with almost anybody rather than their immediate boss. And that score goes down when you're working with your immediate boss, which again I think is a bit damning about line managers in this country. So any big surprises in that lot? What do you think? There might be some, might make some sense. Okay, so that's really just to warm up. But the key takeaway, actually, for most people, work is not the happy place that ideally it should be. You know, we want people to bring our whole selves to work. We want passion, enthusiasm, all those kind of things. But for many people, that's not the case. But organisations with great cultures are much better at doing that. So I'm going to spend the next few minutes just rattling through some stuff from Great Place to Work research. some high-level figures. There's some good stuff here to take away. I'm going to quickly walk through some figures and talk about what drives well-being in organisations, and also what does it mean in terms of the financials. Because there's a business case here for investing in this stuff that actually you need to be able to take. You may be at the early stage of your journey in your organisation, but sometimes you have to sell that in to senior leadership, and that can be a challenge. And you need to be able to argue the case. A great place to work, Petrina did say a little bit there. Many of you may know us because we are one of the organisations that ranks the best workplace in the UK. We have stuff that comes out in The Guardian and The Telegraph. It's usually about the end of April, that time of year, that gets announced. So if you go and look us up, you'll find a lot of listings of the best companies and case studies and things like that on our website. But what we do is we help organisations build high-trust cultures, because high trust is critical because that drives, one of the drivers of well-being in organisations. But I would argue the roots of this go back a long way. One of my heroes, I'm actually a historian by inclination and training. Some of these people are late 19th century, early 20th. If we'd been around 100 years ago, someone like Lever Brothers would have been top of the best workplaces rankings. Fairly paternalistic environment as it was in those days, but this model village that he built at Port Sunlight paid attention to some of those things: space, light, trees, providing space for 800 workers to live with their families, with hospitals and schools that went with it. Very enlightened for that particular time, the late 19th century. So I'd argue the roots of this go back a long way. And you go back to people like John Lewis and John Spadan Lewis, who set their charter up in 1904. Same kind of philosophy and principles underpinning it. And I think Lord Lever was exactly right when he said that. If we leave the human factor out of our calculations, we shall fail every time. And I think over the last few years, there's been a much greater impact or consideration given to well-being at work. And this is fueled by a number of things, technology being one of them, generational shifts coming through too, with younger generations. And these are the kind of things that come out about millennial. There's a lot of talk and sometimes a bit of hype about it, but you'll find similar statistics in lots of studies that come out, really driving the importance of well-being at work. And what we see in the best workplaces is, and these are some of the ones that are ranked at the moment as being the best workplace in the UK, for all of them, well-being is more than just a wellness programme. It's more than just lettuce and lycra. And Sally is going to tell us more about the Salesforce experience. And there's really three things that I think they do as part of the employee deal. The first thing is about the culture, a real values-driven culture. Of course, when it goes wrong, as we've seen, for example, some of the corporate scandals over the last few years, I think Sports Direct, BHS, some of those things, of course, there's been a failure of values. And of course, working in that kind of organisation probably is incredibly stressful. Physical work environment can be important. It's not the only thing. And the other thing are wellness benefits and programmes. So the best workplaces tend to be fairly good on these. They're not necessarily top class in everything. I've seen some of our best workplaces are fairly average physical environments. But the thing that they stand out at is having the values-driven culture at the top. It's hard to have, you can have wonderful physical environment, great programmes, but if there's something wrong with the culture, you'll never get the full benefit of those things, the investment in your wellness programmes. So environment is important. On a hygiene point, toilets are important. Little things like that. I worked for one manufacturing company. The toilet blocks hadn't been updated in 30 years. And it was the single most talked about thing in their employee survey. It may seem like a small thing, but actually, that's just something about the respect the organisation has for the employee. You don't have to look like something out of a hotel, but get the basics right. So, in terms of data, what does that say? Well, we have a number of questions in our survey. There's 58 core questions, and some of them, the things around wellbeing, have some of the biggest gaps between the best workplace and the average. So, in blue, those are the scores of the top 100 workplaces in the UK, and in green, the scores of the national average of the UK as a whole. And some of these questions, there's a 30 percentage point gap. People encouraged to balance their work life and personal life. The best workplaces actually encourage people to do that. This is where the role of the line manager is so important. Another question there about being the perception that it's a physically and emotionally healthy place to work comes out. So people really see that it is a high well-being environment. And in terms of what drives that, so crunching through the data, there are certain things that drive people's perceptions around well-being, around flexibility and so on. The single biggest one is this one, the values-driven culture. The values that people see the behaviour of managers, the organisation being values-aligned and ethical. Other things, not surprisingly, teamwork, the work environment process. So this includes things around the job design, the control you have over the job, and your tasks. And lastly, recognition is also really important. Again, this often comes back to what does the line manager do to recognise people. And if done well, it doesn't have to necessarily cost the earth to do. Simple thank yous make a big difference. The one I'll look at here is about the values-aligned and ethical behaviour. And this is where we see the biggest gaps between the average workplace and the best, over 40 percentage points. Particularly here, management's actions match its words, does it deliver on the promises? So it's that consistency with what you say and what you do is absolutely critical. Get that right, it's so much easier to get other things right and for wellbeing programs to have their biggest impact. So manager behaviour is a critical thing, and I think one thing that stands out in our best workplaces is that they have the attention they put to selecting, developing, coaching, mentoring line managers. They don't just give people the role simply because they've done the job. You get promoted into being a line manager. And they have, without exception, a very large number of people in what I call the top right box, a strong zone. And this is a nice model that I like, where it's not just about being technically great, but you also need the other stuff, the soft skills on the left there, having those leadership competencies, the management competencies to manage your team and support your team, the members of your team. So, last bit is what about the people and financial outcomes? Firstly, is that best workplaces, because they have a reputation for great culture, good at well-being, they attract more talent. Over 40% more applications per place, per job opening. They're better at retaining employees. So this is actually data from the US. This shows the voluntary turnover by industry, the 100 best workplaces in the US, so the Fortune 100 list, that is, compared to the industry average. And it's typically around about half the voluntary turnover rates. So by the time you think about that in terms of your own turnover, and scale it up to think about your recruitment costs and so on, all those costs that come in there of replacing voluntary turnover, that can translate into millions of pounds for big organisations. Fairly significant savings to come out of this if you get it right. They also have lower levels of absenteeism. So our data is around about the sickness days per head per year is around about half that, the 3.8, compared to the CIPD statistics on the left. Again, back of envelope calculation, that's a potential huge saving in terms of productivity and performance there. But I think one challenge which Sally's going to talk about is that the issue is not necessarily about absenteeism, it's presenteeism in the sense that people may be feeling they want to work or need to work when they're actually a bit under the weather. So there's a role there for the organisation. Actually, you are sick. Make sure you get yourself better. Very important, because you don't want your best people burning out. And the best workplaces are good at doing that. Final point is about what does this mean in terms of financial performance. And this is data, in this case, again, from the US, that the Fortune 100 best workplaces in the US, they tend to outperform the broader stock market about twice as much. And we found similar stats around the world, so other markets. The last point is related to that. If you've got a few minutes spare at some point in the next few days, go to this chap's website, Alex Edmonds, he's Professor of Finance at London Business School. He's got a TED Talk, which is 18 minutes long, and he looks at Great Place to Work data. And he's looked at data going back over 20 years in about 20 different geographies. And he's looked at organisations that are ranked as best workplaces, he's looked at their financial performance over time and what does that mean in terms of their share price performance and stock returns. That is the best business case I've seen for if you want to invest in wellbeing and culture. Have a look at that, and if you need to get something past the finance director, use that. It's absolutely powerful stuff. This is the head of finance, the finance professor, saying this stuff really matters. You know, this soft, fluffy stuff around culture, well-being, it does make a difference. And what he found is looking across these geographies, typically they outperform, best workplace outperform their peers by around about 2 to 3% per year in terms of the stock performance. Also, the key point he makes is the stock market actually tends to undervalue this stuff. Because financial analysts, they're looking purely at the finances, they're looking in the rearview mirror. And it takes a bit of time before the analysts, before the market starts to take this into account. It typically takes about 4 to 5 years. So actually, when you see a place gets into the rankings the first time, that's the time to buy the stock. And it will take a while before the stock price rises. But on balance, it's a pretty good stock selection strategy. But he does say this is something to invest for the long term. There may be things that, because you've got to invest in wellbeing and culture, it may take a few years before this comes out. It takes significant investment in time and money. You've got to get the right people in, you've got to build the culture, but it takes time to pay off, hence the 4 to 5 year lag. The short-term effect may be a slight reduction in earnings. And this is where wellbeing can counterbalance that sort of short quarterly earnings performance that we so often see in organisations. But long term, we know it works. So use his TED Talk. Thank you. And I'd like to introduce Sally from Salesforce. And I've had the pleasure of working with Salesforce for a couple of years, and they really are, I think, a fantastic place to work. But have their own challenges, I'm sure Sally will enlighten us on.
Thank you, Charles. So, hello everyone, good afternoon. We are going to make sure that we've got some time for questions after I've just finished spending sort of 10 minutes walking through some of the Salesforce culture. And I think our new corporate branding actually just epitomises that. If you look at the trees, the mountains, we've got a little bear here which talks to our trailhead philosophy, and I'll discuss that. This really is an organisation that likes to have fun. And that is one of the foundations of its culture. I've actually only been with the company 4 months, so this is a whole new experience for me that I'm grasping and loving and thriving every minute of it. So I'm just going to spend some time talking through a quick induction about Salesforce, and then I'm going to look at the importance of organisational culture and why we're passionate about that at Salesforce. I'm going to then discuss the importance of employee survey and using that as a pulse. And then I'm going to touch quickly on something we call the Ohana Bar. So, can I just have hands raised in the room? Who's actually heard of Salesforce? Great, so quite a few people. So I'm not going to run through this in any great detail. I think obviously the company's actually only 17 years old. It is growing at an astonishing rate. If I give an example, last year when we did the Great Place to Work survey, we had 600 employees. This year when we're going to do the survey, we're going to have roughly just over 1,000. So that's a phenomenal growth rate. And I think that's where culture is so important for us as a foundation for making sure that we grow sustainably and keeping the experience real for our employees as well as our customers. So the inspiring piece as well is that the Salesforce culture is really driving a philanthropic model, which is around 1% equity, 1% product, and 1% employee time. So there's that culture piece there. The employee time is really integral in our organisation. We've actually created something called salesforce.org. And I'll allow you to look that up in your own time. And this is where we have an expectation that our employees have to give a minimum of 7 days investment back into their local communities. And they can drive this through various charitable works that we drive with the salesforce.org, but they can also do that locally in the communities in which they live. So it doesn't necessarily have to be here in London. It could be out in the depths of Surrey, Berkshire, or wherever people reside. So I think this really makes the company very different, and it has that global experience and present throughout. So my biggest challenge then, if I think about as an HR director, is how do I grow that organisation, that employee base sustainably? So what is culture? Culture for Salesforce is really who we are. It's what we stand for. And it's really what we value as a community of people pursuing a common vision. And I think that's really important for us to think through. Ultimately, it matters for us simply because it helps drive the decisions and the behaviours that we see within our organisation. It also helps give our customers a consistent experience when they're interacting and working with our employees. And it inspires and connects our employees together, as well as actually making sure that we're an attractive place to work. So we do then, we are seen as a great employer, particularly in the UK. So this is our secret sauce. So what is our culture? So here you can see the fundamentals of our culture, and we actually call our culture Ohana. And Ohana is Hawaiian for family. And this actually stems from Mark Benioff, our company chairman. He used to work for Oracle, and he spent 11 years in that corporate world there, and actually took some time away from working, and then went and thought things through in Hawaii for a period of 12 months. And this is where he sort of founded Salesforce and the values and the philanthropy expressions that we've just talked through. So Ohana is the center of everything of what we do. And actually we have something called hashtag Salesforce Ohana, which is the way our employees follow, share and express their experiences within our organization. So here you can see we talk to employees, customers, partners and communities, and they are all part of our Ohana. So it's not just about our employees, it's also about the wider organizations within which we interact. And then lastly, around here on the outside, you can see our core values. And trust is actually at the very top. So this points really to what Charles was talking about. How do you drive that engagement and that discretionary effort from your employees? So this is extremely integral for us as an organization. So I wanted to give a couple of examples, really, of some of our secret sauce, because I'm sure, having worked in the corporate world myself for a number of years, we all experience different behaviors and values that we kind of put up there, and we strive our employees to follow them, and we measure them on them wherever we can in a performance review, etc. But I wanted to kind of show really how we keep it real in Salesforce and what has really sort of inspired me being new to that organization. So one example here is what we call the V2 Mum. And obviously being a cloud computing organization, we have an app for it. And a V2 Mum is really it's really a goals and objectives setting tool. And this is something that's cascaded from the very top, so from Mark Benioff, down out to our employees in the field. And really, it focuses on aligning everyone to the vision that they're working towards within whatever community of where they're working. It looks to the value, so what's important to them, the methods, how are we actually going to do this, the obstacles, which I find quite interesting, so what are the risks, what are going to get in our way, and then lastly, the metrics, how do we actually measure this success of what we're accomplishing. Now, the V2 Mum is something that is published for everyone as an employee globally to view. So we can look in and see what Mark Benioff has cascaded as what he's going to be driving and what he's going to be owning this year. And obviously this is something that's an iterative process, so people can actually change that and update throughout the year. So as a new employee, I was expected to publish my own V2 Mum within 90 days of actually joining the company. And this, again, really just shows that we're all connecting and working towards something that is transparent and that you actually have this trust to drive this. So if we talk about well-being, as one of our sort of engagement factors. We are obviously all conscious around how we're striving for balancing pace within our different organizations. And these are sort of the 4 areas that we kind of focus on in Salesforce. So that's really the giving back. So that's like the volunteering that I talked about, this 1% of employees' time. And actually, you can see here I've highlighted that in the UK, we're doing pretty good this year. We're at 89% of our target, and we'll be driving that further as we continue to the end of our fiscal, which is actually February. Equality, so that's extremely important around just making sure that everybody feels equal across our organizations. We talk about diversity. It's a very hot topic out in the working world, but it's something that's really pushed and sort of driven by our own employees within the organization. So here we have an example of something called Outforce. Wellbeing. This is something I'm going to talk further on around this Ohana bar. So what are we doing around our wellness? One example I can give is that we have a wellness reimbursement program. So employees can, every quarter, submit expenses up to the value of £100. And well-being comes in many different forms. It's not just about necessarily the sporting activities. It could be around massage. It could be around meditation courses. It could be around anything that makes an employee feel well. So that is something that we have great feedback on from our employees. And then lastly, fun. That's something that's really important. And I'm going back this afternoon to our end of quarter celebrations where we'll have bears dressed up and there'll be lots of millennials running around closing the last deals of the quarter. So fun is very present in the organization. So this is all great that you've got this foundation of these values and obviously the expectations that we have coming from our corporate mothership in the US. But at the same time, for me, working with my UK leadership team, we need to make sure that we are on track and we are delivering what we say we should be delivering. And this is kind of where we use the employee survey. And we have this twice a year from our global organization, and we also use the Great Place to Work one. So we survey our employees 3 times, which you could argue actually is maybe a little bit of survey fatigue, but our employees are still encouraged and they want to give us feedback. So at least we feel that we're on the right path here. Now, this is a live example of what we're doing at the moment. So we've just connected with the UK leadership team and focused on what are we driving for the next 12 months? What are we making sure is really hitting home for our employees around our culture, around our engagement? And here you can see we've got connectivity, which is really just how are we communicating with people? How are we making sure that our remote employees, those that are not always present in the office, feeling part of our community? We've got empowerment, so really giving ownership back to our employees and making sure that they're driving some of this strategy versus just being a top-down process. Well-being, something that's what we're talking about here today, so it's not just about that fitness and that nutritional element, it's also the other pieces that we're bringing together, and I'll touch on this with our Ohana bar example. And then lastly, career development, something that employees are always pursuing. So if I look at empowerment, really what are we asking our employees to do? And here we've got this example of the culture champions. And this is something where we are driving internal focus groups across each functional area. And these are the individuals that are tapping in to make sure our culture is real, make sure that we're doing the right things that employees want us to deliver. And so this is a team of individuals that I'm relying on to tell me how we're doing and what we need to improve. At the same time, I want them to also own some of those initiatives. So they're actually driving and feeling empowered around what they're collectively delivering to our organization. Secondly, we've got our Vibe ambassadors who are really driving this fun culture, this injection that we need to have. And obviously that can't necessarily be driven by the leadership team. So this is another group of individuals that are taking on extra responsibility to drive within our organization. And lastly, this is our Ohana bar. So this is really something that we created in the last 12 months based upon feedback from our employees around bringing a spotlight together of financial well-being, developmental well-being, and health well-being opportunities. So here we're leveraging on our external benefit providers to really come to our office or come and present webinars for us that talk through really the benefits that our employees can gauge further. Because sometimes I think people forget with the challenge of our working days, they forget really what's out there and what's available to them. And this has been a fabulous experience that we've been leveraging, particularly with Vitality, who are our healthcare provider. And this really brings together all of these wellness elements that we've been talking about.